Progress, we are told, is neutral. Progress, we are told, lifts all boats. Progress, we are told, is the steady march of humanity toward freedom and abundance. But I ask you, whose progress is this? Whose hands build it, and whose pockets receive it? Look closely at the world around you, and the illusion shatters. What is called progress under capitalism is too often the enrichment of the few built upon the exhaustion of the many. Every age declares itself advanced. Every ruling class stresses its domination in the language of inevitability. In earlier centuries, kings ruled by divine right. Today, capital rules by economic necessity. But the substance is the same: power concentrated above, obedience demanded below. The factories, the offices, the platforms, the machines. These are celebrated as triumphs of human ingenuity, yet the human being within them is reduced to a tool, a cost, a variable to be minimized. Let us speak plainly. Progress under capitalism does not begin with human need. It begins with profit. New technologies do not first ask how labor might be freed, how life might be enriched, how suffering might be reduced. They ask a colder question: how can more value be extracted with less cost? Thus, every leap forward in productive power becomes, for the worker, a leap backward in security. The machine that could shorten the working day instead threatens unemployment. The innovation that could lighten labor instead tightens the grip of discipline. This is no accident. It is the logic of capital itself. In the capitalist system, society is divided into classes not by talent or virtue, but by their relation to the means of production. On one side stand those who own the factories, the land, the capital. On the other stand those who must sell their labor power to survive. The former command progress, the latter endure it. And so when productivity increases, when wealth multiplies, when the economy grows, the first fruits are always claimed by the owners. The worker is told to wait, be patient, your time will come. But patience has become a weapon turned against you. History shows us this pattern again and again. When new wealth is created, it accumulates at the top. Wages lag behind productivity. Living costs rise faster than incomes. Precarity spreads while profits soar. And when the contradictions sharpen, when crises erupt, when bubbles burst, it is the working class that is sacrificed in the name of saving the system. Progress is privatized, crisis is socialized. The defenders of this order will say this is simply how development works. First the few, then the many. First accumulation, then distribution. But this promise is endlessly postponed, like a horizon that retreats as you walk toward it. The many are always told they must wait until the system has finished enriching the few, and yet the system is never finished. Capital always demands more labor, more time, more sacrifice. What they call progress is, in truth, organized inequality. Under capitalism, social relations appear as relations between things. Human labor becomes a commodity. Time becomes money. Life itself is measured by exchange value. In this world, the worker produces wealth that he does not own, value that he cannot command, power that stands against him as an alien force. The more he produces, the poorer he becomes in control over his own existence. This is the great contradiction at the heart of capitalist progress. Abundance grows, yet alienation deepens. Do not be deceived into believing this condition is natural. It is historical. It was created and it can be unmade. The ruling class praises competition, yet it organizes monopoly. It praises freedom, yet it binds the worker to necessity. It praises innovation, yet it fears the most important innovation of all, the conscious organization of the working class. For when workers recognize themselves not as isolated individuals, but as a collective force, when they see that their shared condition is not personal failure, but systemic exploitation, the foundations of bourgeois progress begin to crack. True progress does not mean faster machines owned by fewer hands. True progress means the liberation of human potential. It means that the immense productive powers created by collective labor are consciously directed toward collective well-being. It means that work ceases to be a form of quiet coercion and becomes a realm of human development. It means that the wealth produced by all is controlled by all. This cannot be achieved through appeals to morality alone. The system does not exploit because it is cruel, it exploits because exploitation is profitable. To demand justice without changing the structure of production is to beg the jailer for a softer chain. The emancipation of the working class must be the act of the working class itself. Therefore, organization is not a choice, it is a necessity. Isolated workers are weak, united workers are a historical force. Trade unions, movements, parties and solidarities across borders are not obstacles to progress. They are the means by which progress is reclaimed from private hands and returned to society. The ruling class understands this well. That is why it invests so much effort in division, race against race, nation against nation, worker against worker. But capital is global, and so must be resistance. The future is not written by technology alone, it is written by struggle. The same productive forces that today deepen inequality contain within them the possibility of a higher social order, one in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Whether that possibility is realized depends not on the goodwill of the powerful, but on the consciousness and courage of the oppressed. Let us then discard the myth that progress must first serve the few. Let us reject the lie that exploitation is the price of advancement. Let us affirm a different principle, that society advances only when those who produce its wealth also command its direction. Workers of the world, you have been told to wait long enough. The factories, the cities, the knowledge, the machines, all bear the mark of your labor. The future they promise but never deliver is yours to claim. Rise not as individuals pleading for inclusion, but as a class demanding transformation. For when the many move together, the progress of the few comes to an end, and the progress of humanity can finally begin. Progress under capitalism prioritizes profit over human need because the system is structured around the accumulation of capital rather than the fulfillment of human life. From its foundations, capitalism organizes society not according to what people require to live with dignity, but according to what can be bought, sold, and transformed into surplus value. Human labor, creativity, and time are treated as inputs in a vast machine whose sole purpose is expansion. Need becomes secondary, tolerated only when it aligns with profitability, ignored or crushed when it does not. In this system, production does not occur because society lacks food, housing, healthcare, or meaning. It occurs because investment demands return. Factories do not open where hunger is greatest, but where labor is cheapest. Medicines are not developed where disease is most deadly, but where purchasing power is strongest. Entire populations may suffer without relief, not because solutions are impossible, but because their suffering does not generate sufficient profit. Capitalism thus creates the grotesque contradiction of abundance alongside deprivation. Warehouses full while people go without. The worker stands at the center of this contradiction. Labor is the source of all value, yet the worker has no claim over what they produce. Their activity is dictated by the imperatives of capital, not by social need or personal fulfillment. The working day is extended or intensified, not because society requires more goods, but because profit demands greater extraction. When efficiency increases through technology, the benefit does not manifest as more leisure or security for workers, but as layoffs, precarity, and intensified competition among those who remain employed. Even Innovation itself is shaped by this logic. Technological progress is celebrated as a neutral or benevolent force, but under capitalism it becomes a weapon of discipline. Automation is introduced not to free human beings from monotonous labor, but to reduce labor costs and weaken collective bargaining power. Workers are made to fear the very tools they helped create. as each advancement threatens to render them disposable. Progress becomes something that happens to them, not for them. Capitalism also distorts social priorities by transforming basic needs into commodities. Housing becomes an investment vehicle, healthcare a market opportunity, education a debt trap. Access is determined not by necessity, but by ability to pay. Those who cannot afford these essentials are blamed for their condition, as if exclusion were a personal failure rather than a structural outcome. Meanwhile, immense resources are poured into luxury goods, speculative finance, and wasteful consumption for the wealthy, revealing the true hierarchy of values embedded in the system. The defenders of capitalism argue that profit is merely a means, that it ultimately serves human advancement. But history demonstrates the opposite. Profit becomes an end in itself, subordinating all other considerations. When profit is threatened, wages are cut, protections are rolled back, environments are destroyed, and lives are sacrificed. Crises are resolved not by addressing human suffering, but by restoring market confidence. The needs of the many are deferred indefinitely, while the stability of capital is treated as sacred. This prioritization of profit over need is enforced not only economically but ideologically. Individuals are taught to measure their worth by productivity, their survival by employability, their dreams by market value. Solidarity is replaced with competition, cooperation with rivalry. Social problems are reframed as personal shortcomings, obscuring their systemic origins. In this way, capitalism reproduces itself not only through institutions, but through consciousness. What appears as progress within capitalism is therefore deeply misleading. Growth figures rise, technologies advance, fortunes multiply, yet insecurity spreads and alienation deepens. The worker produces more than ever before, yet controls less of their own life. The system praises freedom while binding millions to the constant threat of unemployment, debt, and poverty. Human potential is vast, but it is narrowed and constrained by the demands of accumulation. This condition is not the result of mismanagement or moral corruption alone, but of the fundamental structure of capitalist relations. As long as the means of production are privately owned and production is organized for profit, human need will remain subordinate. The system cannot be persuaded to act otherwise, because to do so would be to cease being itself. Profit is not a deviation from capitalism. It is its core principle, shaping every decision, every institution, every promise of progress offered to the working class. Technological advancement deepens inequality when privately owned, because technology under capitalism does not belong to society as a whole, but to a narrow class that controls the means of production. Though machines, algorithms, and systems are created through collective knowledge accumulated across generations, the ownership is concentrated in private hands. This concentration transforms what could be a universal instrument of liberation into a mechanism of domination, reinforcing existing class divisions rather than dissolving them. Every technological leap increases productive power, allowing more goods and services to be created with less human labor. In a rational society, this would translate into shorter working hours, greater leisure, and improved living standards for all. Under private ownership, however, increased productivity serves a different purpose: the expansion of profit. The gains generated by technology are captured by owners, while workers face intensified exploitation or redundancy. Technology thus becomes a force that widens the gap between those who own and those who must sell their labor to survive. The privately owned machine does not free the worker, it disciplines them. Automation is introduced not to reduce drudgery, but to lower labor costs and weaken collective resistance. Workers are made interchangeable. Their skills devalued as machines or software take over tasks once performed by human hands. The threat of replacement hangs constantly over the working class, forcing acceptance of lower wages, longer hours, and worsening conditions. The same innovation that multiplies wealth simultaneously deepens insecurity. This dynamic extends beyond factories into offices, platforms, and digital spaces. Algorithms determine workloads, wages, and even visibility, while remaining opaque and unaccountable to those subjected to them. Surveillance technologies monitor productivity with relentless precision, extracting ever more labor in ever less time. Workers are reduced to data points, optimized and discarded according to profitability. Technology, instead of enhancing human autonomy, becomes an instrument of control. Private ownership also determines which technologies are developed and which are neglected. Research follows investment, not social necessity. Technologies that promise high returns receive vast funding, while those that could address widespread suffering but offer little profit are ignored. Life-saving innovations are patented and priced beyond reach. Knowledge is enclosed behind intellectual property laws that transform shared human understanding into private monopolies. What could be commonwealth is converted into exclusive power. As technological capital accumulates, it amplifies the dominance of those who already possess economic power. Large corporations absorb smaller competitors, using superior technology to consolidate markets and eliminate alternatives. Network effects lock users into systems they do not control, while profits flow upward with unprecedented speed. A handful of firms and individuals come to command entire sectors, shaping labor markets, political decisions, and even social behavior. Inequality ceases to be merely economic and becomes structural. The working class, meanwhile, is told that technological change is inevitable and neutral. Displacement is framed as a personal failure to adapt rather than a consequence of ownership relations. Workers are urged to retrain endlessly, competing against one another for fewer stable positions, while the owners of technology face no such insecurity. Responsibility is shifted downward, while power remains concentrated at the top. This process, LSO, fragments solidarity. As technology reshapes labor, workers are divided into contractors, freelancers, gig laborers, and automated systems, each isolated and pitted against the other. Collective organization becomes more difficult, while capital coordinates seamlessly across borders through digital networks. The same technologies that could connect workers globally are used to atomize them locally, weakening resistance and reinforcing inequality. Privately owned technology thus accelerates a familiar pattern: social labor produces private wealth. The collective intelligence of humanity is embedded in machines and systems that operate against the very people who created them. The worker confronts technology as an alien force, something imposed rather than shared. Progress appears as an external power, advancing without consent and demanding adaptation without offering security. This inequality is not a side effect of technological advancement, but its expected outcome under private ownership. As long as technology serves capital rather than society, each innovation will deepen existing hierarchies. The problem is not the machine itself, but who controls it and for what purpose. Without transforming ownership and power, technology will continue to magnify inequality, concentrating freedom and abundance in the hands of the few, while expanding precarity and dependence for the many. Wealth accumulates with owners, while workers are told to wait, because capitalism is structured to reward ownership rather than labor, possession rather than production. Those who own the means of production claim the results of collective work as their private reward, while those who actually generate value are granted only enough to survive and continue working. This imbalance is not temporary or accidental, it is the normal functioning of the system. From the first wage contract to the most complex financial structure, Capital positions itself as entitled to growth, while labor is instructed to be patient. The worker enters the economic relationship already at a disadvantage, lacking access to land, factories, or capital. They must sell their labor power in order to live. The wage they receive is not determined by the value they create, but by what is necessary to keep them returning to work. Everything produced beyond that amount becomes surplus, claimed by the owner as profit. As productivity rises, this surplus grows, yet wages remain constrained. The worker is told that higher pay will come later, after stability, after growth, after the market adjusts. Waiting becomes a permanent condition. When profits increase, owners describe it as success. When wages stagnate, workers are told to be realistic. The language of economics is used to naturalize inequality, to suggest that accumulation at the top is a sign of health rather than extraction. Workers are promised that wealth will eventually trickle down, that patience will be rewarded, that sacrifice today ensures prosperity tomorrow. Yet tomorrow never arrives. Each economic cycle resets the promise, pushing fulfillment further into the future. This pattern repeats across industries and generations. Workers build companies from nothing, invest years of their lives, adapt to new demands, absorb risks, and endure instability. When success comes, it is claimed as the genius of ownership or management. When failure comes, it is shared downward through layoffs, wage cuts, and austerity. The owner accumulates during booms and protects themselves during crises, while the worker is expected to absorb uncertainty in both. Even collective gains are delayed. When workers organize and demand higher wages or better conditions, they are told the timing is wrong. There is always a reason to wait. Economic downturns, global competition, inflation, shareholder expectations. Meanwhile, executive compensation grows, dividends are paid, and assets appreciate. Wealth flows upward continuously, while justice is postponed indefinitely. The instruction to wait is not neutral, it is a method of control. By framing improvement as something that will arrive later, the system discourages resistance in the present. Workers are taught to hope rather than organize, to endure rather than confront. Patience is elevated as a virtue, while urgency is labeled dangerous or irresponsible. In this way, delay becomes a political tool, ensuring that accumulation continues uninterrupted. Time itself is unevenly distributed. Owners experience time as opportunity, investment, and growth. Workers experience time as pressure, deadlines, and exhaustion. The future is open to one class and foreclosed to another. While wealth compounds quietly through ownership, workers must constantly prove their worth anew, competing for survival in markets they do not control. This accumulation also reshapes society. As wealth concentrates, so does power. Owners influence laws, shape public discourse, and define what is considered reasonable or possible. Workers' demands are framed as excessive, while accumulation is framed as deserved. Inequality becomes self-reinforcing, protected not only by economics, but by ideology and institutions. The promise that workers must wait assumes that the system is moving toward fairness. But accumulation shows the opposite trajectory. Capital does not naturally distribute itself, it centralizes. Those who have gained more leverage, better access, and greater protection. Those who wait fall further behind, their labor subsidizing a system that excludes them from its rewards. Waiting is presented as temporary, but it becomes a lifetime. Workers are told to wait for raises, wait for promotions, wait for stability, wait for retirement, wait for dignity. By the time waiting ends, the value they produced has already been absorbed, reinvested, and transformed into new forms of ownership that stand beyond their reach. Wealth continues to grow where it already exists, while workers are locked into cycles of anticipation without arrival. producing a world where patience is demanded endlessly and fulfillment remains permanently deferred. Exploitation is systemic, not accidental or the result of individual moral failure, because it arises from the very structure of capitalist society rather than from the personal cruelty or greed of particular individuals. The system does not depend on bad people behaving badly, it depends on ordinary people fulfilling roles that are rewarded by the logic of capital. Even the most well-intentioned employer must extract surplus value to survive competition, just as even the hardest working labourer remains exploited regardless of diligence or virtue. Exploitation persists not because ethics are absent, but because the system renders ethics powerless against economic necessity. At the heart of capitalism lies a specific social relation, the separation of workers from the means of production. This separation forces the majority to sell their labour power in order to live, while a minority purchases that labour in order to generate profit. The wage contract appears fair on the surface, an exchange between equals, but beneath it lies an asymmetry of power. The worker sells their capacity to work for a fixed wage, while the capitalist purchases the right to extract more value from that labour than is returned in compensation. This difference is not an error in calculation, it is the source of profit itself. Because profit depends on surplus value, exploitation is not optional. If wages were to equal the full value produced by labour, profit would disappear, capital accumulation would stall, competition would intensify, and businesses would collapse. Thus, exploitation is continuously reproduced by market pressures, regardless of personal intent. A capitalist who refuses to exploit is outcompeted by those who do. A firm that prioritizes human need over profit is punished by the market. Structural forces compel behavior that individuals alone cannot reverse. Inequality exposes the falseness of moral explanations for inequality. Workers are often told that their hardship results from lack of effort, skill, or discipline, while wealth is framed as the reward for intelligence or risk. These narratives obscure the underlying relations of production. They individualize outcomes that are produced collectively and structurally. A worker can labor tirelessly and remain poor, while an owner can accumulate wealth without contributing labor at all. The difference lies not in character, but in position within the system. Exploitation also persists through normalization. Because it is woven into everyday economic life, it becomes invisible. Long hours, insufficient wages, precarious employment, and chronic insecurity are treated as unfortunate but natural conditions, rather than as products of specific social arrangements. When suffering is universalized, it loses its political meaning. Workers are encouraged to adapt rather than resist, to internalize failure rather than question structure. The system further protects itself by fragmenting responsibility. Each decision appears small, technical, and isolated. Wages are kept low because of market rates. Jobs are cut because of efficiency. Conditions worsen because of competition. No single actor appears fully responsible, yet the outcome remains the same. Exploitation emerges as an impersonal force, reproduced daily through countless interactions that all follow the same logic of accumulation. Even reforms, when detached from structural change, fail to address the root. Laws may limit the most extreme abuses, but they do not eliminate the necessity of surplus extraction. Benefits may soften hardship, but they do not alter ownership. As long as labor remains commodified and production is oriented toward profit, exploitation adapts rather than disappears. It shifts form, relocates geographically, or reappears under new legal categories, maintaining its function while changing its appearance. The idea that exploitation is a moral failure serves a political purpose. It suggests that the system is fundamentally sound and only needs better behavior. It redirects anger away from structures and toward individuals, preserving the underlying relations of power. By framing exploitation as accidental, The system absolves itself and presents inequality as a regrettable side effect rather than as a requirement. Understanding exploitation as systemic changes the terrain of struggle. It reveals that liberation cannot be achieved through individual advancement alone, nor through appeals to conscience. It requires collective action aimed at transforming the social relations that make exploitation necessary. The working class must recognize itself not as a collection of isolated victims, but as a historical force produced by and capable of reshaping the system that exploits it. So long as labor is compelled to sell itself to capital, so long as wealth is accumulated through ownership rather than work, and so long as production is organized for profit rather than need, exploitation will continue regardless of who occupies positions of power, regardless of intentions, regardless of reforms that leave the foundations intact. Because the system reproduces exploitation as surely as it reproduces goods, wages, and profits through its daily operation. Collective organization is the path to reclaiming true progress, because progress under conditions of exploitation and inequality cannot be secured by isolated individuals acting alone. The individual worker, no matter how skilled, diligent, or inventive, remains constrained by forces far greater than personal effort. Markets, ownership, and power are organized collectively by the ruling class, and they can only be confronted collectively by those who are subjected to them. Without organization, the worker experiences society as something external and unchangeable, a structure to be navigated rather than transformed. Capital relies on fragmentation. It separates workers by trade, by contract, by nationality, by identity, and by competition for survival. This division is not incidental, it is essential to maintaining control. An unorganized working class is forced to bargain individually with capital, entering negotiations already defeated by necessity. Each worker is compelled to accept what is offered, fearing replacement by another equally desperate. In such conditions, exploitation appears unavoidable, and progress remains monopolized by those who command resources and coordination. Collective organization reverses this imbalance. When workers unite, they transform from a mass of individuals into a social force. Organization allows labor to confront capital on its own terrain, matching centralized power with collective strength. Through unions, movements, and political organization, workers assert their shared interests and disrupt the mechanisms that rely on their isolation. What was once experienced as personal hardship is revealed as a common condition produced by the same system. True progress cannot be reclaimed through appeals to benevolence or fairness from above. History shows that rights are not granted willingly by those who benefit from inequality, they are won through struggle. The shortening of the working day, the expansion of social protections, and the recognition of labor rights emerged not from generosity, but from organized pressure. Each gain was the result of collective action that made exploitation costly and resistance unavoidable. Organization also transforms consciousness. Through collective struggle, workers come to understand their position within society not as an individual fate, but as a structural role. This awareness breaks the illusion that success or failure is purely personal. It exposes the shared roots of insecurity, low wages, and alienation. In recognizing themselves as a class, workers begin to see that the wealth they produce gives them not only economic importance, but historical agency. Capitalism presents progress as something delivered from above, managed by experts, investors, and institutions. Collective organization challenges this narrative by asserting that progress must be shaped democratically by those who produce it. When workers organize, they do more than defend immediate interests. They begin to question who controls production, for what purpose, and in whose interest. This questioning strikes at the heart of private ownership, and opens the possibility of reorganizing society around human need rather than profit. Without collective organization, technological and economic advances are captured by capital and turned against labor. With organization, those same advances can be redirected. Productivity gains can become reduced working hours instead of layoffs. Innovation can serve public welfare instead of private accumulation. Social wealth can be planned and distributed according to collective priorities rather than market profitability. Organization is the mechanism through which potential progress becomes actual emancipation. The ruling class understands this threat clearly. That is why organization is resisted, weakened, regulated, and attacked. Laws are designed to limit collective bargaining. Media narratives frame organized workers as disruptive or unreasonable. Individual success stories are promoted to undermine solidarity. These efforts reveal the power of collective action by the intensity of the opposition it faces. Collective organization is not merely defensive, it is creative. It allows workers to imagine and construct alternatives to existing arrangements. Through cooperation and solidarity, new forms of social relations emerge that challenge competition and hierarchy. These forms point beyond capitalism toward a society in which production is consciously organized for collective benefit, where progress is measured not by profit margins but by the expansion of human freedom. The path to reclaiming true progress does not run through isolated advancement or endless patience. It runs through unity, struggle, and the recognition that the conditions shaping life are neither natural nor fixed. When workers organize, they cease waiting for progress to arrive and begin asserting their right to define it, drawing their strength from shared labor, shared experience, and shared power within the very system that depends on them for its existence. Progress, stripped of illusion, reveals its true character in whose lives it uplifts and whose it exhausts. As long as profit governs production, advancement will continue to enrich owners while demanding patience, sacrifice, and silence from workers. Technology will deepen inequality. Wealth will concentrate upward, and exploitation will persist, not because of human failure, but because the system is designed to function this way. Yet history is not driven by systems alone, it is driven by struggle. When workers recognize their shared condition and organize collectively, progress ceases to be a privilege hoarded by the few and becomes a force shaped by the many. The same hands that build the world possess the power to transform it, and when they move together, the false progress of capital gives way to a future grounded in equality, dignity, and collective control over the wealth society creates